remember the exact moment the dining room went still. My fiancé's father, a retired RCMP Staff Sergeant with 35 years of service and a voice built for giving orders, was in the middle of explaining to me how the Canadian justice system had gone wrong. He had one forearm resting on the edge of the table, his water glass pushed slightly to the side to make room for his point, and he was speaking the way people do when they've decided the person across from them just isn't following along. He said that the problem wasn't the police. The problem was the courts. Judges, specifically. Judges who spent their careers in expensive law school offices and then sat on a bench handing down conditions that meant nothing, bail that protected no one, and sentences that sent the wrong message entirely to the wrong people entirely. The table went quiet after that. My fiancé shifted in his chair beside me. His mother reached for her fork and set it back down again without using it. My fiancé's father leaned back in his chair, satisfied, the way men are when they believe they've finally said the thing that everyone else was thinking, but didn't have the nerve to say out loud. I folded my napkin once in my lap, looked across the table at him, and said, very calmly, I think I understand the frustration. I was appointed to the Ontario Court of Justice bench last month. For a moment, nothing in that room moved at all. My fiancé's father stared at me the way a person stares at a road sign they've just driven past too quickly, certain they misread it, not yet ready to turn around and check. I'm sorry, he said slowly. You're what? But to understand how we ended up there, in that dining room in a quiet subdivision outside Hamilton on a Saturday evening in October, you have to start about 3 weeks earlier. I had just received my judicial appointment. The paperwork was official. The swearing-in ceremony had happened at Osgood Hall on a Thursday morning with a small group watching from the gallery, and my name had just been added to the court's public directory. After 12 years as a Crown attorney in Toronto, the last 4 as senior Crown counsel in the Major Crimes Division, I was now, technically and formally, a judge. That transition is a quieter thing than people expect. One day you're standing at the bar arguing cases, and the next you're sitting above it deciding them. The title changes. The relationships change. Even the way people talk to you in the courthouse hallway changes slightly, a little more careful, a little more deliberate. I was still adjusting to all of it. What I hadn't expected was how complicated my personal life would become at the exact same time, because 2 months before that ceremony, my fiancé had asked me to marry him. He had done it simply, practically, the way he did most things, over dinner at a small restaurant near our apartment in the annex, with a ring that he'd clearly thought about and a question that he clearly meant. My fiancé wasn't a lawyer. He worked in software development for a healthcare technology company downtown, logical, steady, genuinely funny in the dry way that takes a while to notice. We'd met 4 years earlier at a mutual friend's cottage near Muskoka, spent a weekend arguing pleasantly about whether the dock needed repairing, and somehow hadn't stopped talking since. He knew what I did. He knew about the cases, the promotions, the appointment. Outside of work, we didn't spend much time discussing it. It was easier that way. Not because it was something to hide, nothing like that, but because 12 hours thinking about criminal law is enough. Being home without it was something I needed, and he understood that without me having to explain it. One evening, about a week after the swearing-in, he came over to our place after a long day, looking slightly like a man who had lost an argument with himself on the subway ride home. He opened the fridge, closed it without taking anything out, and then turned around. My parents are asking to meet you, he said. That's fair, I said. We've been together 4 years. He nodded, but he didn't quite match my tone. He sat down at the kitchen counter and turned his coffee mug in a slow circle. I waited. With him, waiting was usually faster than asking. My dad, he started. I leaned back against the counter across from him. What about him? He retired from the RCMP 3 years ago. Staff Sergeant, 35 years. He paused. He's very proud of that. That's understandable. He's also pretty traditional in how he sees things. He looked up, particularly about the courts. I kept my expression level. In 12 years of criminal law, I had heard every version of that sentence. How so? My fiancé exhaled slowly. He thinks judges are too soft. That the charter gets used as a shield for people who shouldn't have one. That bail conditions are a joke. That the system protects the wrong side. He paused again. He says it a lot. A lot of people say that, I said. Yeah. He looked at me carefully. And he doesn't exactly know what you do. That made me set down my own mug. What does he think I do? My fiancé rubbed the back of his neck. I told him you work in law. That's true. As a consultant. He said it quickly, like speed would soften it. I looked at him. You told your father I'm a legal consultant. I said you advise on legal matters. For 4 years. He winced. I kept meaning to explain more, and then it never felt like the right time, and then too much time had passed, and why? I asked. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. Because the second he hears judge, the whole dinner becomes about the courts. About every case he was ever frustrated with. About every sentence that felt too light. I wanted him to meet you first, before any of that. He shrugged slightly. Is that terrible? It wasn't, not entirely. After 12 years in crown work, I had spent my entire career being introduced by title first. Most of the time it was necessary. Sometimes it was exhausting. The idea of sitting across from someone as just a person, not a role, not a symbol of a system they'd spent decades resenting, was genuinely appealing. When is dinner? I asked. He blinked. Saturday. All right? You're sure? I looked at him. I've cross-examined career criminals for 3 days at a stretch. I think I can manage Saturday dinner. He laughed, relieved in the way people are when they've been waiting to breathe. But before I went to sleep that night, something he had said stayed with me. He'd mentioned that his father could get intense when the subject of the courts came up. I had told him that was fine. I believed it at the time. What I didn't account for was how personal it would feel when the lectures started. Or how long one October evening could stretch when a man with very strong opinions decides he's found exactly the right audience. The drive to Hamilton took just over an hour on the 403. My fiancé drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio turned down low, which meant he was thinking more than he was listening. The trees along the highway had turned that particular deep Ontario October red, the kind that always looks slightly unreal, like someone turned a filter on the whole province for the weekend. You've gone quiet, I said. I'm fine. You've been fine since Mississauga. He smiled slightly without taking his eyes off the road. He just gets into it. The court stuff. I don't want you to feel like you're being attacked. I don't feel attacked easily. I know. A pause. He's a good man. He just spent a long time watching people he put a lot of work into arresting walk out of courtrooms with less than he thought they deserved. That's a real frustration, I said. It's not a simple system. No. He agreed. But he thinks it should be. We turned off the highway onto a residential street that felt like half the suburban streets in Ontario. Newer houses on larger lots. A few mature maples still holding their color. Hockey nets at the end of 2 separate driveways. His parents' house was a 2-story red brick at the end of a cul-de-sac, with a Canadian flag on the front post, and a garden that had been put to bed carefully for the season, the way someone does when they take it seriously. My fiancé parked and turned off the engine. He sat for a second without moving. You don't have to explain anything tonight if you don't want to, he said. I know. I mean about your job. You can just be myself? I said. He smiled. Yeah, that's what I'll be. His father opened the front door before we reached the porch steps. He was a broad man in his late 60s, the kind of build that had probably been very useful once, and hadn't entirely gone anywhere since. Silver hair, close cut. The posture of someone who stood at attention long enough that it became the default. He looked at his son first, shook his hand in the way fathers shake their sons' hands when there are other people watching, and then his eyes moved to me. He assessed me the way I had come to recognize. The quick, methodical read of someone who spent a career making fast judgments about strangers. You must be Claire, he said. I am. It's good to meet you. His handshake was brief and firm. He didn't offer anything more than his name in return. Behind him, his wife appeared in the hallway, smaller, with an easy smile and the particular calm of someone who has spent years being the temperature regulator in a house with a strong-willed person in it. Finally, she said warmly, hugging her son. Then she turned to me. Come in. Come in. It's cold. The house smelled like roasting chicken and something with rosemary. The hallway had framed family photos up one wall. A younger version of my fiancé's father in dress red serge, a few older black and white photos of what looked like an earlier generation of the same family, and near the end of the hall, a glass case with an RCMP badge, a pair of corporal stripes, and a medal of exemplary service mounted on dark felt. My fiancé's father noticed me looking. 35 years, he said simply. That's a significant career, I said. He gave a short nod that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite dismissal, something in between, the way people acknowledge a compliment when they've decided it's only partly deserved. We moved to the dining room. The table was already set, a roast chicken in the center, roasted potatoes, green beans, a basket of rolls from a local bakery. His mother poured water and asked whether I'd like wine, which I appreciated. His father sat at the head of the table. I sat across from him. My fiancé sat beside me, and I could feel him doing the math on seating arrangements, deciding whether this was better or worse than the alternative. The first part of dinner was pleasant enough. His mother asked about where I grew up, which was Guelph, and whether my family was still there, which they mostly were. My fiancé talked about a project at work. His father asked about the drive, and whether the 403 had been bad, which it hadn't. The chicken was very good, properly seasoned, skin done right. But somewhere around the second helping of potatoes, the conversation turned the way it apparently always turned, according to my fiancé's prior warning. "So you advise on legal matters," his father said. "That's right," I said. "What kind of work?" "Mostly related to criminal procedure. How decisions get made." He nodded slowly, chewing. "Civil side? Corporate? Criminal?" That sharpened his attention slightly. He set his fork down. "Defense side or Crown?" "Closer to the Crown perspective," I said, which was not technically untrue. His father sat back a little. "Well, at least that's something." He reached for his water glass. "You know the problem with this country's criminal justice system?" My fiancé looked at the ceiling briefly. His mother said, "Robert." "I'm just asking," his father said. He looked at me. "You work in it. You must see it." "I see a lot of different things," I said. That wasn't the answer he wanted, but it gave him an opening, which I suspected was what he had been looking for. He began, not rudely, not aggressively, but with the particular confidence of someone who has rehearsed this argument enough times that it no longer requires much effort. The courts, he explained, had lost their understanding of what enforcement actually looked like. Judges sat in courtrooms reading case briefs and charter arguments, and made decisions about situations they had never stood in themselves. He'd arrested people. He'd knocked on doors at 2 a.m. He'd been to scenes that he didn't describe in specific detail, which I appreciated, but which he made clear had stayed with him. And then he'd watched cases get stayed on technicalities. Watched people he'd spent months building files on walk out on bail conditions that amounted to a sheet of paper. His mother tried twice to redirect the conversation. My fiancé said his father's first name once, firmly, which his father acknowledged, and then continued past. The charter, his father said, with a particular weight on the word, was written to protect innocent people, not to give lawyers 17 different ways to suppress evidence that everyone in the courtroom knows is real. "That's a fair criticism of how it sometimes gets applied," I said. He seemed surprised that I agreed with him. He leaned forward slightly. "You've seen it." "I've seen it argued many ways," I said. "The defense bar," he said, and shook his head once. "I have nothing against defense lawyers personally. Everyone has a right to representation. I understand that." He pointed slightly toward the table. "But there are judges in this country who have never spent one day in a patrol car, never had to make a call in 10 seconds in a parking lot at midnight, and they sit up there and decide that the way a search was conducted makes everything after it inadmissible." He paused. "That's not justice." "The exclusionary remedy under Section 24 is genuinely complicated," I said, keeping my tone even. "Courts do weigh it differently depending on the facts." He looked at me with something between approval and slight condescension. "You know your stuff for a consultant," he said it almost kindly. "But knowing the theory and watching it get applied in a real courtroom are two different things." My fiancé put his fork down. "She's right though, Dad," he said carefully. His father looked at him. "I'm not saying she's wrong on the theory. I'm saying the theory misses the reality." He turned back to me. "You understand?" "I do understand the frustration," I said. He nodded, satisfied. His mother looked at me across the table with a particular expression, apologetic and slightly resigned, the look of someone who has been in this kitchen for this conversation more times than she can count. His father continued. He talked about a case from his last posting in Manitoba, a trafficking investigation that had taken 14 months and ended in a Section 8 application that nearly undid everything. He talked about a colleague who'd left the force early because he couldn't take the feeling of building something careful and watching it come apart in court. He talked about the last 10 years in particular, something about the tone of sentencing, the language judges use now, the weight given to particular arguments that he believed had gotten heavier, while other considerations had gotten lighter. I listened to all of it. Some of it I agreed with. Some of it was the kind of generalization that looks accurate from one angle and complicated from every other. Some of it was simply incorrect. But incorrect in the way that comes from real pain. The frustration of someone who had worked hard and cared deeply, and had felt that the effort didn't always produce the result that the effort deserved. "I'll tell you something," he said. At what felt like the 40-minute mark of a conversation that had been about 25 minutes too long for everyone at the table except him. "I have a lot of respect for Crown Counsel, the ones who actually try. But the bench." He shook his head again, slowly, like a conclusion he'd reached long ago and confirmed every time. "The bench in this country has lost touch with what it's supposed to be doing." My fiancé exhaled softly. "Dad," he said, "can we?" "I'm not saying every judge," his father said. "I'm sure some of them are fine." He looked at me. "No offense to anyone you work with." "None taken," I said. His mother stood and began collecting plates. The kitchen provided a natural pause. My fiancé helped her carry things through, which I suspected was partly to give himself something to do with his hands. His father leaned back in his chair with the comfortable posture of a man who had said what he believed and felt better for it. I took a slow breath. I thought about the previous 7 years in major crimes. I thought about the Crown briefs I had filed and the voir dires I had argued and the sentencing submissions I had stood up in court and delivered with every piece of case law I could find behind them. I thought about what it had felt like to be sworn in, to take that oath seriously, to understand the weight of what sitting on a bench actually required. And then I placed my hands flat on the table. "You're right," I said, "that courts have to maintain the public's confidence. That's not optional. It's the basis of the whole system." He nodded once. "Exactly." I met his eyes. "It's something I've thought about for the 12 years I spent as a Crown attorney, and something I think about now." I kept my voice quiet. "I was appointed to the Ontario Court of Justice last month." The room didn't make a sound. My fiancé had come back to the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room. He froze there, holding a serving bowl with both hands. His father looked at me. He didn't speak immediately. He was doing something behind his eyes, recalculating, running back through the last hour the way you run back through a conversation when you realize you misread something important very early on. "You're a judge," he said finally. "Not a question. Just the word, sitting there." "Yes." He was quiet for another moment. "Ontario Court of Justice." "Yes." "Criminal Division?" "Yes." His jaw moved once. He looked at his son in the doorway. My fiancé looked back at him with an expression that said he was very aware of the serving bowl in his hands and did not know what to do with it. "You knew," his father said. "Yes. And you didn't think to mention that. I wanted you to meet her first," my fiancé said quietly. "Before all the rest of it." His father looked back at me. The certainty that had filled his posture for the last hour had shifted into something else. Not anger, not quite shame yet, but a kind of careful stillness that I recognized from courtrooms. The moment when something has been said that can't be unsaid, and a person is deciding what to do with that. His mother came back from the kitchen and stopped in the doorway beside her son. She looked at her husband, then at me, then back at her husband. "Robert," she said gently, "did something happen?" "Claire is a judge," he said. His wife was quiet for exactly 1 second, then she closed her eyes briefly, the way someone does when they've just heard the thing they were half expecting and hoping not to hear. "The Ontario Court of Justice," I added, which wasn't helpful but seemed accurate. His mother sat down slowly. She looked at her husband with the particular expression of a woman who loves someone and also cannot protect them from themselves. "You spent the last hour explaining the justice system," she said. "I'm aware of that," he said, to a judge. "I understand what happened." She pressed her lips together. My fiancé was still holding the serving bowl. I reached over and gently took it from him and set it on the table, because it seemed like the right thing to do. His father rubbed a hand across his mouth. He stared at the tablecloth for a moment. The clock on the wall in the kitchen ticked twice. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You really don't." "Yes, I do." He looked up at me directly. "I spent the better part of this evening telling you that judges are out of touch." That was, he stopped, reconsidered the word he'd been reaching for, and started again. That was embarrassing. "You weren't trying to insult me," I said. You were talking about something you care about. That doesn't make it right. It makes it understandable. He shook his head once. You were very patient. It's a useful quality. He looked at me with something different now. Still embarrassed, still recalibrating, but studying me in a new way. Not the way he'd looked at me at the door. This was something more careful, more honest. His wife quietly poured everyone more water. My fiancé sat back down beside me. Nobody reached for dessert immediately. How long were you crown? His father asked, after a moment. 12 years. The last 4 in major crimes. He was quiet. Trafficking? Violent offenses? Primarily, yes. He nodded slowly. And now the bench. Yes. Another pause. That's a significant career. It's the career I wanted. His father looked down at his water glass. He turned it once. I've spent 35 years believing I could read a room, he said, half to himself. Tonight I apparently couldn't read a dinner table. His wife made a small sound that might have been sympathy and might have been something else. After dessert, which was apple crumble with ice cream and which his mother had clearly made carefully, my fiancé helped clear the table. His parents' house had a back porch that faced a yard still holding the last of the autumn color, a silver maple at the far end gone almost entirely yellow. I stepped outside while the kitchen noise settled around the running tap and the soft clatter of dishes. The air had gone cool the way October evenings do in Ontario, past the point of pleasant, and into something that makes you glad for a jacket. Somewhere past the fence line, a neighbor was raking leaves. I could smell wood smoke from somewhere down the street. The porch door opened behind me a few minutes later. I expected my fiancé. It was his father. He came out slowly, the way people do when they're not entirely sure of their welcome. He stood on the other side of the porch looking at the yard. He didn't say anything immediately. It's a good yard, I said, because someone had to say something. He made a quiet sound. Margaret planted most of it. I just mowed it for 30 years. He paused. I owe you a better apology than the one I gave you at the table. You don't need to. I do. He turned toward me slightly. I assumed things about you. I assumed you were young and you'd studied law in a classroom and you'd never had to make a hard call in a hard situation. He stopped. I didn't ask. I just assumed. That happens. It shouldn't have. He crossed his arms over his chest, not defensively, more like someone bracing against something. The thing is, I know better. I spent 35 years telling my people not to judge a situation before they had the facts, and then I sat down at my own dining table and did exactly that. I didn't say anything. Why didn't you correct me earlier? He asked. He said it genuinely, the way someone asks a question they actually want answered. I thought about it. Because you weren't coming from a bad place, I said. You were coming from experience. From cases that mattered to you and ended in ways that felt wrong. That's real. I've sat across from enough grief in that career to know what it looks like. He was quiet for a moment. You could have humiliated me. That wasn't what I was there to do. He let out a long breath. My son chose well, he said, in a voice that was quieter than everything else he had said that evening. The porch light came on automatically above us as the yard went darker. Can I ask you something? I said. Go ahead. The Section 24 applications. The stays. The cases that fell apart. I paused. Were there decisions in there that you understood later, even if they frustrated you at the time? He thought about it. Genuinely. That surprised me. Some, he said. A few, yeah. He looked at the yard. There was a search once, early in my career. I was certain we'd done it right. Turned out we hadn't, not technically. And the judge excluded the evidence. He shook his head. I was furious for a year. A pause. Then I became a supervisor, and I spent 15 years teaching people not to make the same mistake I made that night because I finally understood why it mattered that we'd done it wrong. That's actually the system working, I said gently. He was quiet for a long moment. Yeah, he said finally. I suppose it is. He called me on a Wednesday. I was in my chambers reviewing disclosure materials for an upcoming preliminary hearing when my assistant knocked and said there was a personal call from a Robert, no last name offered, who said I would know who he was. I picked up the line. Robert. Judge Mercer. He paused. Sorry. Habit. Claire. It's all right. He cleared his throat. I was wondering if you had any time this week, for a coffee or a walk. A pause. There's a memorial near the detachment where I used to work. RCMP officers from the region. I go there sometimes. Another pause. I thought it might be a better place for a proper conversation than my dining room. I can do Friday, I said. Thank you. The memorial was near a detachment building in the west end of the city, a stone walkway with an iron fence and a small granite wall etched with names. Not large, not dramatic, just careful and permanent. His father was already there when I arrived, standing near the wall with his hands behind his back, reading names he'd probably read dozens of times. He turned when he heard my footsteps on the path. Thanks for coming, he said. Of course. We walked slowly along the stones. The October sky was flat and pale. The kind of day that in Ontario can feel like the year is taking a breath before winter. I talked to some of the old team, he said. People I came up through the ranks with. Told them what happened at dinner. He glanced sideways at me. Word moves fast when you're embarrassed. What did they say? He made a short sound. They laughed. He said it without bitterness. And then one of them said something that stuck. He stopped walking. He said, "The RCMP trusted her with a courtroom. Maybe I should." We stood near a bench at the edge of the memorial garden. His father sat down first. "I've had the wrong picture for a while," he said. "Of what the bench looks like. Who it is." He looked at the granite wall. I kept thinking of the cases that went wrong. The times I felt like the law was working against the job I was trying to do. And I never stopped to think that maybe the people making those decisions had also sat in rooms with grief in them, had also made hard calls. He looked at me. I never gave them that. "It's a complicated relationship," I said, "between enforcement and the courts. It's always been. It's supposed to be in some ways." "The independence of the judiciary," he said quietly. "Yes. We learned that at Depot." He meant the RCMP Training Academy in Regina. I learned it. I just forgot what it was for. He rubbed his hands together. Became easier to be frustrated with it than to trust it. I sat down beside him. The wind moved through what was left of the leaves on the trees along the fence line. "I'd like to start over," he said. "If you're willing. With dinner and with," he gestured vaguely. "All of it." "What would starting over look like?" I asked. He thought about it. "Asking questions first," he said, "before I start explaining things." I smiled slightly. "That's a good start. And maybe," he added, "you could tell me something, sometime, about how sentencing decisions actually get made. What goes into it?" He looked at me. "I'm not saying I'll agree with all of it. You don't have to. But I should understand it," he said. "Before I have an opinion." I offered him my hand. He shook it. This time it was longer than the handshake at the front door, steadier. 2 weekends later, my fiancé and I drove back down the 403. The highway maples were mostly bare now, the last holdouts letting go in the wind. My fiancé drove with one hand on the wheel this time, easier in the shoulders. "You nervous?" he asked. "No." He glanced over. "Really? Really?" I looked at the road. "The first one was the hard one. Because of my dad? Because of everything." I paused. "This one I'm looking forward to." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you. For the way you handled it. It wasn't complicated." "It was," he said. "You just made it look like it wasn't." The flag was still on the post in front of the house. His father opened the door again, and this time he stepped out to the edge of the porch to meet us rather than waiting in the doorway. "Claire," he said. "Good to see you." His handshake was different this time. Both hands, briefly. The kind of handshake that means something was decided before you arrived. His mother appeared over his shoulder, smiling. "Same menu," she said cheerfully. "I told Robert we're doing this properly." "Roast chicken?" I asked. "Roast chicken," she confirmed. "If we're going to rewrite the evening, we start from the same place." His father stepped aside and held the door. The dining room looked the same. Same chairs, same tablecloth, same photograph on the wall of the old detachment building where he'd spent his last posting. His father pulled out my chair before sitting down himself. His mother poured wine and didn't wait to be asked. Halfway through dinner, his father set down his fork and looked at the table. "Before we go too far," he said, "there's something I want to say." My fiancé straightened slightly. His mother folded her hands. His father looked at me. 2 weeks ago, I made assumptions about you that were wrong. I didn't ask who you were. I decided who you were, and I talked accordingly. He paused. "I spent the better part of my career telling junior officers that assuming is how you get people hurt, and then I came to my own dinner table and forgot it entirely." Nobody interrupted. "I'm proud of my career," he said. I'm proud of the people I worked with and the job we did. He glanced at the photograph on the wall briefly, but I also know the job I did was only one part of a larger system, and the larger system includes the courts. He looked at me again. And I think I've been treating that part of the system like an opponent for too long. His wife blinked once, quietly. I'd like to welcome you to this family the right way, he said. Starting now. The dinner after that was easier. He asked about major crimes, specific cases I could speak to generally without breaching anything. I told him about the way a sentencing submission gets built, the factors, the proportionality analysis, the weight given to victim impact. He listened carefully. He asked careful questions. Once or twice he said that makes sense in the tone of someone who hadn't expected it to. His mother told a story about a Crown attorney she'd met years ago at a community event who'd been terrible at small talk but brilliant in court and who she'd always remembered. His father laughed at it. My fiancé looked visibly relieved throughout most of the meal. After dessert, the same apple crumble, his father and I ended up at the kitchen table while his mother and my fiancé took the dog around the block. You know what I've been thinking about this week? His father said. What's that? You didn't react. That first dinner. You had every reason to. You could have corrected me 3 different times before you did. Escalating it wouldn't have helped anything. He nodded slowly. Patience, he said. And honestly, I wanted to hear what you thought, even if some of it was frustrating. I shrugged. You know things about the gap between enforcement and adjudication that don't come through in legal briefs. That's worth hearing. He was quiet for a moment. I never thought about it that way. Most people don't. He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle the way my fiancé does when he's thinking. I noticed that. It was probably not coincidental. The real thing, he said, the thing that stayed with me after you left that first night, wasn't the embarrassment. He looked up. It was realizing I'd decided who you were before you sat down. I'd decided what you represented, and I didn't see you at all. Outside? The dog barked once at something down the street. That happens to a lot of people, I said. In a lot of rooms. It shouldn't happen at my dinner table. No. But it does. And what matters is what you do after. He looked out the kitchen window at the dark yard. You know what I think now? What? I think the strongest thing you did that first night wasn't the reveal. He turned back to me. It was sitting through the whole evening without letting me see that I'd gotten it wrong. Because if you'd corrected me early, I would have gotten defensive. I wouldn't have heard it. He shook his head. You made me find it myself. I didn't say anything to that. That's a skill, he said. It's something you learn. In court? Everywhere, I said. The front door opened and the dog came in first, followed by his mother and my fiancé, smelling like cold air and damp leaves. What are you two talking about? His mother asked. The justice system, his father said. She looked at him with raised eyebrows. And how is that going? He looked at me. The corner of his mouth moved. Better, he said. We're doing better. On the drive back, the 403 was quiet. My fiancé had the radio on low again, but this time it wasn't because he was anxious. He was just comfortable. There's a difference. So, he said. So, I said. That was different. Very. He glanced over at me. He likes you. He would never say it like that, but he does. I watched the highway lights pass. I like him, honestly. He's difficult, but the difficulty comes from somewhere real. My fiancé was quiet for a moment. You were never going to embarrass him, were you? That first night. No. Even though you could have, especially because I could have. I looked out at the dark tree line. I've been in enough rooms with enough people who've been publicly humiliated to know it never actually changes anything. It just closes them off. I paused. He needed to see it himself, at his own pace, in his own house. My fiancé nodded slowly. Sometimes people come to dinner expecting an argument and leave having learned something instead. Sometimes the thing that changes someone isn't the moment you prove them wrong. It's the moment they realize, quietly, in a yard or a kitchen or a memorial garden, that they've been carrying a version of a story that was missing too many people. I've spent a long time in rooms where the stakes were very high and the words mattered enormously. I've learned that the loudest response is rarely the most effective one. That patience is not passivity. That letting a moment arrive on its own schedule, rather than forcing it early, can be the difference between a door that closes and one that stays open. His father called me 2 weeks after that second dinner. He asked if I'd be willing to speak at a community forum his old Veterans Association was hosting, about sentencing reform, about the relationship between the courts and law enforcement, about where the friction comes from, and what it costs. I said yes. Not because it would change everything, not because one conversation undoes 30 years of frustration on either side, but because the point was never to win the dinner table. The point was to still be at it. And if this story reminded you of someone who learned, a little late but genuinely, that respect asks something of all of us, share it with someone who might need to hear that tonight. And if you want more stories about the moments that quietly change people, follow along. They're worth staying for.